All right, welcome back, Year 9s. Now, we've gone through exercise 6A and up to 6D already, so we've already learned about the different indice laws, but today we're going to go through negative indices. So what happens if we've got a number, so let's say 3 to the power of a negative number, so for example, 3 to the power of negative 4, then what do we have to do in that situation there? So we have to go about and try and find, is there a particular formula, or a particular way that we can go ahead and solve this? So if we use our calculator, we know that 2 to the power of 4, we can just put that in the calculator and we end up with 16. 2 to the power of 3, once again, the calculator is 8. Now, hopefully you remember that 2 to the power of 3 is the same as 2 times 2 times 2. Now, when we have 2 to the power of 2, that's 2 times 2, obviously, and that gives us 4. 2 to the power of 1 is we're multiplying 2 one time, so it's just 2. And remember, anything to the power of 0, so our 0 power law, anything to the power of 0 is 1. Now, what happens if we have to the power of negative number? Now, we have, in this example, we've got 2 to the power of negative 1. Now, obviously, you can't multiply a number by itself negative 1 time. So, what we're going to do instead is we're going to, so we've got 2 to the power of negative 1 here. We're going to make it 1 over 2 to the power of positive 1. So what I've done is I've actually found the reciprocal. So for those of you that don't remember, the reciprocal means I flipped a fraction, or in this case I put a 1 over and then what we're working with. So the reciprocal, and then I changed the power to be a positive number. So now I've got 1 over 2 to the power of 1 instead of 2 to the power of negative 1. So I'll get 1 over 2 because 2 to the power of 1 is just 2, so that means that's 1 over 2. Okay, now if you go ahead and look at our next example, you look at 2 and to the power of negative 2, they've done the same thing. So if you put that in the calculator, you actually end up with 1 over 4 or 0.25, depending on what your calculator's settings are. But you would actually end up with, so 2 to the power of negative 2 is 1 over 2 squared. Now that is a positive 2 because I put it under the fraction, and I end up with 1 over 4 because 2 squared is 4. Same thing over here, 2 to the power of negative 3, I get 1 over 2 to the power of positive 3. So once again, I've removed the negative and I put it under the fraction, and I get 1 over 8. And if you put that in the calculator, you would get 1 over 8 or 0.125, depending on what your calculator setting is. If I continue, I know that I can actually look at this formula over here. So you can go ahead and just do it immediately using the method that I've just talked about, or you can use this formula, that's up to you. So let's go ahead and try and put this in practice. So I've got to state the following using positive indices. So remember, the indices are the powers we're working with. Right now, I've got 1 over 4. If I change that, oops, let's zoom back in. If I change that, I know that equals to 1 over 2 squared. I know that because 4 is 2 squared, so I can leave it like that. But I want it over positive indices. Now, so we're looking for positive indices. So in this case, I've got 2 squared. If I were to change it back into this form over here, that would give me a negative indice. So I'm going to ignore that, and we can end that question there. Now, if I go over here, I've got 1 over 9. I know that 9 is the same as 3 squared. So I'll replace that, end up with 1 over 3 squared, and that's all I will be required to do for that question. If we move on, I need to look over here. I've got express each of the following with positive indices, once again. However, this time I'm working with algebra, so I'm working with numbers that I do not know. I've got x to the power of negative 2, so we're going to do the same thing we did above. And I'm going to go ahead and say, well, I'm putting it over the fraction, so under the fraction, sorry. So 1 over, now x, now once again I take away the negative, because I put it under the fraction, it becomes 1 over x squared. Same thing over here on this side, except it's a little bit more difficult because we've got one term that's got, one variable that's got a positive indice and one variable that's got a negative indice over here. So I know that I'm going to leave the 3 up the front, so I got 3 times a to the power negative 2 times by b to the power 4. Hopefully you understand that if there are no operations in the middle, so for example no plus, no minus, that means that they're multiplied. I know that 3 is the same, I'm going to multiply by, now I know that a to the power of negative 2, I'm going to put it under the fraction, so 1 over a, and I'm going to change the power to positive, so I get 1 over a squared. But this is still positive, right? So I'm just going to write times b to the power of 4. If I simplify that, I end up with 3b to the power of 4 over a squared. However, this step over here is the most important one. We need to be able to separate so that we know the positive and negative terms, the powers, sorry, and then I can go ahead and multiply them afterwards. A couple more examples. Over here, I've got once again expressing with positive indices. I know that I've got 1 over c to the power of negative 2. Now, hopefully you remember I was talking about reciprocals. When I'm talking about reciprocals, it doesn't have to be on the bottom of the fraction. Because if I just say, let's say for example, I've got 6, that is the same as 6 over 1. So to find the reciprocal of that, I would just flip that and end up with 1 over 6. But if I already had 1 over 6 and I try to find the reciprocal, then I would end up with 6 over 1. So the reciprocal isn't always on the bottom of the fraction, it's just on the other side of the fraction. In this case, I've got 1 over c to the power of negative 2. So c to the power of negative 2 is a negative power. If I've got a negative power, I put it on the other side of the fraction and I make it a positive. So instead of writing 1 over c to the power of negative 2, I'm going to write c to the power of positive 2 over 1. And hopefully you remember that if anything's over 1, you don't have to write over 1, you just write whatever's on the top, which gives us c squared. Alright, same thing over here, except I've got 1 on top, 1 on bottom. So instead of x to the power of negative 3 being on top, I'm going to move it to the bottom. And instead of y to the power of negative 5 being on the bottom, I'm going to move it to the top. And I'm going to change those powers to a positive. So, fraction, and end up with y to the power of 5, positive 5 on top, and x to the power of positive 3 on the bottom. Alright. Now, express using positive powers only and then evaluate without using your calculator. So, from here, I need to go ahead and do what we did before. So, I know that 3 to the power of 4 is the same as 1 over 3 to the power of positive 4. So, once again, I'm flipping it, or putting it on the other side of the fraction, and then I'm going to change those negative indices to a positive indices. Now, from there, I know that 3 to the power of 4, now you could use a calculator, but I know that 3 to the power of 4 is the same as, and this is using your understanding of your index laws that we learned before, same as 3 squared times 3 squared, because you just add the 2 and 2 together, right? 3 squared is 9, so 9 times 9 gives me 81. Up next, I've got negative 5 over 3 to the power of negative 2. It's quite straightforward in the sense that it's the same as the other ones. So I've got negative 5 on top. I'm going to ignore that. I've got 3 to the power of negative 2. Now, if I've got 3 to the power of negative 2, I'm going to move it to the other side of the fraction. And then I'm going to change the power to a positive one. So I've got negative 5 on top, multiplied by 3 to the power of 2 over 1. So I've moved this one on the bottom to the top, and I've just left the one on the bottom. Once again, I don't need that to the power divided by 1 at the bottom because it's just the same number on top. From there, I know that 3 squared is 9, so negative 5 times by 9, which gives me negative 45. Alright, last one. This one's a little bit more difficult. I need to go ahead and use my index laws from the last lesson. So I know that it's negative 4. And once again, I'm finding the reciprocal, so I'm flipping the fraction. Okay? So it's the same. This one over here. Oops. This would be the same as if I flip the fraction, so I get 3 over 2 instead of 2 over 3. And then I make it all to the power of a positive 4. From there, using our index laws from the last lesson, I'm going to say that this is 3 to the power of 4 over 2 to the power of 4. So this one works for both the denominator and the numerator. So from there, I know that 3 to the power of 4, we just worked it out before over here. 3 to the power of 4 is 81. And 2 to the power of 4, which is 2 times 2, times 2 times 2, which is 4 times 4 is 16. So my final answer would be 81 over 16. If you're asked to not use a calculator, then leaving it in this fraction form is completely fine, assuming it is simplified. Hopefully that makes sense. Let me know if you need any help.